St. Augustine High School in North Park sues Governor Newsom over the state's reopening guidelines. Fox 5 legal analyst Wendy Patrick joining us now to try and explain what it could mean for other schools here. Wendy, good morning.
Good morning, Raul.
This is interesting. How often do we see lawsuits like this one?
Well, once every 100 years. I think we talk about this when we have a pandemic. And so the precedent set here, ask me in 100 years when I'm on, and I'll tell you exactly what is going to happen here. But Raul, let me put this in perspective for our viewers. Remember the 1982 blockbuster, The Year of Living Dangerously? Well, the 2020 remake is The Year of Living at Home with your kids. That has been significantly disruptive, both to parents trying to telework and to kids who remember high school is not just about content, it's also about colleagues and classmates and the socialization experience that schools offer. So lawsuits like this really are saying you have to strike a balance. If a school is able to demonstrate that it is able to open safely with the proper precautions in place to where students do not get infected or, God forbid, bring something home to mom, dad, or their grandparents, then why shouldn't they be able to open? That's the sentiment behind this lawsuit and many just like it across the country.
Like that Georgia high school that said the same things. We got it all under control. We have all the safety precautions, and then boom. They had to shut down.
Boom is right.
So,
but here's the difference. St. Augustine had both teaching and sports during the months of June and July with no COVID cases. So it's very different. There's no one size fits all when it comes to the kind of precautions that are necessary to make sure that a school can open safely. And that's why many schools are saying, don't just have a blanket rule, have it case by case. Go actually and look at the schools and see what they've done to ensure the safety, not just of the students, but of everybody else that works there, some of whom may be either having a pre-existing condition or be in an age range where they're particularly at risk. We don't want anybody to get infected, but if they can prove that they've taken the proper precautions, why shouldn't they be able to open?
So how does a school being private or being public affect a lawsuit like this where they're essentially suing the governor of the state?
Well, private schools basically are saying, you know, we're not run by the state. We are funded a different way. And in fact, the same scenario just went down in Maryland, where they were making the same argument. Private schools should be able to open if they can prove that it's safe to do so. Now, let me take you down the map to Florida, where, believe it or not, the opposite lawsuit is being filed, where the state was saying, you know, we want to open the schools, and schools and parents were saying, we're going to sue to keep them shut because there's so many COVID cases there. So all these different factors in the mix really highlight the fact that it's jurisdictional in terms of whether or not certain schools should be safe to open. And that is the basis for lawsuits like this. Ironically, Raul, whether the state or the schools or the parents are suing to either keep them open or keep them closed.
I mean, is that part of the argument? I mean, it seems it's all piecemeal here and there and here and there, and some say, well, that's the way to do it. That's not the way to do it. The legal aspects, what legal aspects do schools have to consider when reopening, if they do so?
Well, that's a tricky question, and that's always I make the 100-year joke. You know, there's not a lot of pandemic case law out there to draw from that gives us the kind of guidance we would like. I can say that a lot of these suits have not been successful partly because, you know, the watch list, San Diego's on the COVID watch list. Sometimes courts will say, well, obviously there's governmental powers that exist to make sure that there's public safety concerns are first and foremost. And it's hard to argue against some of those requirements. But here's why even that's tricky, Raul. We're suffering this diagnosis of information whiplash when it comes to COVID guidelines. Remember, masks, no masks, beaches are open, now they're closed, now they're open again. If there's no consistent guidelines to look to decide whether or not, for example, it's safe to open a school, it's harder to build a case in court. But that goes for both sides.
How difficult is it? Because all of this is happening in real time. The developments are happening in real time. The scientific discovery, the medical, it's all happening in real time, along with the rulemaking, the lawmaking. How do you handle that in terms of moving forward? I mean, we've never gone through this before.
Right. You know, the judges, I hope they're making the big bucks if they're deciding cases like this, because you're right. When you have these novel types of issues, one of the things you want to do is you look at trends, you look at numbers, you look at contagion rates, and you look at what schools have done. For example, some schools across the country that have been arguing to courts that they should be able to open have installed plexiglass. They're not just requiring masks, but they're holding classes outside. Now, that's easier to do in San Diego than it is in
Right.
San Francisco or in New York City or some other places in the country. But they're looking at the different types of ways in which they can ensure that they can abide by public safety, even if they're on a watch list like San Diego is, and still be able to offer students this socialization experience where you're learning. You're also gaining all of the other benefits that come with being in a classroom versus learning remotely. And you know, parents have a stake in this as well.
Of course.
They've become super parents, trying to somehow telework, teach, train, do all the kinds of things that our schools usually do, at least a significant part of. So everybody has a stake in seeing what happens with lawsuits just like this.
We're all just going through this at the same time, trying to
Yes, we
figure it
are.
out, trying to navigate our way through it. I think a little bit of patience will go a long way for everyone. Wendy Patrick, we thank you as always.
Thanks, Raul.